Welcome to Regulated Digital, where we speak to the people trying to do right by people's rights without disrupting human connection. In this episode, we'll be talking about trust in regulated digital experiences, what it means, how it gets broken, and how to fix it. We're talking to Ollie King, founding partner at Engine CXD. They focus on helping organizations design better, more human customer journeys. Hi, Ollie.
Hey, Sam. Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks for taking the time. I've been really excited about this one. In regulated digital journeys, what does trust actually mean in practice? Where does it sort of turn up?
I think we often ask the wrong question. We ask whether customers trust us, when I think the better question is actually how confident do they feel at each moment in the journey. And for me, trust isn't a decision. It's actually an emotional prediction. It's that quiet feeling you get inside that says, I think everything's going to be okay. And you see this very much in behavior. People commit sooner, they need less reassurance, they make fewer calls, they're more forgiving when occasionally things go wrong. Confidence isn't created by this one kind of big moment. It's through hundreds of really tiny interactions. Every message, every handover, every explanation either adds a little confidence, or if handled badly, kind of quietly strips that away. And we've started calling these things kind of confidence signals. They're the tiny cues that tell people whether it's safe to continue or not.
So in terms of those confidence signals, it seems to me that there's a kind of often a trade-off between, or we often think of there being a trade-off between efficiency and trust, efficiency and confidence. What are you seeing as the biggest sort of trust breakers? And are they an undermining efficiency?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think that most organizations don't lose trust through one catastrophic failure. I mean, certainly they can. Things are going dramatically wrong. I think when there's a breakdown, there's often great opportunity for a service recovery, and you can sometimes kind of come out of that with a fan for life, so to speak. But I think this trust kind of breaks down through the accumulation of small moments of uncertainty. And those things kind of tend to happen when people stop feeling that the organization is in control, that they don't know what's happening next. They have to repeat information. They get kind of different answers from different people, or they, receive a letter that raises more questions than it answers. And none of these things really feel significant on their own, but you bring them together and they create doubt. And I think one of the biggest trust drains that we've identified is when organizations mistake communication for reassurance. Sending an update isn't actually the same thing as making someone feel informed. People aren't really asking, have you contacted me? They're asking, can I stop worrying now?
What do I do next?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why trust is emotional. It isn't built simply by completing a process. It's built by reducing uncertainty.
It's funny. I was thinking about this yesterday when I was at the self-serve checkout, and the drive for efficiency. If you compare checking out with a person versus a machine, there's always that moment for me. I might be a particularly anxious person or paranoid person, but there's always that moment where you sort of tap your phone, you take all your bits in your arm because you've forgotten your bag, and you're sort of waddling out the shop, and you think, is anyone going to stop me?
Yeah.
Because
How
what
do they
we
know I paid
turned
for
it
this?
into, are they going to check whether I've paid for this? Because actually what we've turned that into is, rather than someone going, I'm just checking out your stuff for you, having a little chat to you, and there's no need for anyone to dive in at the last minute and check you haven't stolen anything. We've turned a positive experience into the potential, a gap, but the potential for a negative one, because all that happens is someone dives in and goes, you might have stolen something.
No,
That anxiety is very difficult to quantify. So how do we, if we're talking about trust affecting all these different, having this impact across the customer journey, how are we measuring these things? Where are we seeing them show up, and how do we link them? Are we looking at churn? Are we looking at remediation? Are we looking at harm? And how are we linking the sort of cause to the effect?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's nowadays we can do that brilliantly. And I think that the hidden failure is that, think about that kind of self-checkout thing, is that organizations have been brilliant at removing effort from experiences, but they aren't removing uncertainty. Lots of journeys that we've created over the years have become much faster, much cheaper, far more digital. And we've really succeeded at doing that. But somewhere along the way, we've removed many of those kind of confidence signals that used to exist. So, someone saying, have you got this? The opportunity to ask, is this normal? The reassurance someone's in control, those things have gone. And technology has replaced this with all these interactions, but they haven't, replaced the confidence that has been stripped away. And that's what we refer to as this kind of trust gap. It's where the journey seems to work really efficiently, but emotionally it's less certain. And the thing is that whilst efficiency creates value, confidence also kind of creates behavior, positive or negative behavior. And the organizations that understand both will have that real competitive advantage. When somebody is more confident, they are spending more, they're spending faster, they're telling their friends, they're being more forgiven. When they feel less confident, they are, they're delaying decisions, they're asking more questions, they're increasing the cost to serve of the business, which is really tough, and has an expense.
So there are all these checklists for designers, people looking at journey, people looking at integrating new features into their products and creating new journeys within their platforms for accessibility and conversion rate optimization and time on page, all these sort of more tactical signals. How do I start to design for the deeper and long-term impact of confidence signals and on trust?
I think that many organizations are actually optimizing for the wrong sort of emotion or the wrong emotion. They often talk about delight, don't they? But in regulated journeys, I think delight is rarely the goal. If you're applying for a mortgage or making an insurance claim or you're receiving a medical diagnosis, you don't necessarily want delight. What you really want to do is feel very confident.
Yeah, well, there might be a consideration of it on a completion screen. There's an animation, and that's kind of what they would consider as that bit of delight. Yeah.
Ta-da! Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think the confidence comes from understanding what happens next, and believing in it. Or if something goes wrong, you'll be treated fairly. And when those things are missing, people just don't feel uncertain. No, I said before, they delay decisions, they abandon the journeys, they choose somebody else they trust more. And that's why the emotion isn't the opposite of rational decision making. It's often the thing that enables it. And we know that 80% of decisions that people take are based on their emotions, how they feel. So you've really got to get that right.
So if we take quite a concrete example from that, something that would give me confidence through a regulated, say, a form with an insurance company might be having a button at the bottom or a button at the top that says, do you need to talk to a human? Do you need to have an exit ramp, as it were, to speak to someone in more detail? But as we know, the more things you have on a page, the more buttons you have on a page, the more things you can do, increases friction. So how do you assess whether friction is good friction or bad friction?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great question, because friction at times is really important. But I think it's the ability to differentiate between good friction and bad friction. And there's a simple test. After the interaction, does the person feel more or less confident? Bad friction creates effort, filling in the same form twice, waiting for no apparent reason, having to read terms and conditions that frankly nobody understands unless you're a lawyer. That's all bad. Good friction does the opposite. It slows someone down just enough to increase confidence, confirming a really large payment. In that moment, explaining why identity verification matters is important. Giving someone the opportunity to review an important decision before they commit to it is really important. So good friction doesn't make journeys harder, it makes them easier. So I think organizations, they shouldn't necessarily aim for frictionless journeys. They should aim for these kind of confident, rich journeys. And don't be worried about putting a bit of friction in there if it's actually going to, put the customer at ease.
And where are you seeing that? So with your own clients, where are you seeing that have the highest impact? Is it in those those large transaction type moments where you really need assurance that or you need confidence that you're doing something very important. And so a bit of friction actually gives you that reinforcement to trust, because if you just sort of clicked a button and you're able to transfer 10 grand of your money, you'd be like, okay.
It's. I mean, I think those moments are critical when we get into the designs that we do. It's really about understanding and seeing where this confidence is naturally dipping. And I think what's wonderful about particularly digital journeys is that confidence leaves a digital footprint. So you can see when people are delaying doing something. You can see when they go back to the FAQs or they go somewhere else. And those are all very clear indications that there's hesitation or uncertainty there, and you can respond to that. Sure, before a financial commitment, just after an automated decision, during a long period of waiting, whenever kind of responsibilities have passes from one team to another, those are moments when people start to ask themselves, am I doing the right thing? And it's at that opportunity where a simple intervention, a clear explanation, an expectation, a progress update, a route to a person if confidence is seeming to fall. Those aren't expensive changes to make, but they fundamentally change how the experience feels. And I think that's becoming even more important as AI becomes much more common, because the challenge isn't simply about automating decisions. It's actually about designing confidence in and around those.
Yeah, I suppose our journeys are starting to get, or about to get, even more automated. And even that step where someone might come in at the self-service checkout and say, have you stolen something, could be automated within the next 5 years. So you're removing all human interaction from many journeys. The effect that has on your emotion within the journey, but just also within your sort of daily life is quite visceral.
No, definitely. And I think there's a distinction to make, because, a lot of digitization, it is seems really lame to say, it's incredibly important that people want it. And it's wrong to say that people just want to interact with humans, so being humans back in. I think it's about finding out how we design we design what people were looking for from humans into the experience. So it's how you begin to get that empathy and that understanding. That's really important there. And it's at those small things where it matters, making sure that people feel guided, they don't feel abandoned, they know where to go to, they kind of recognize, the human in the loop, so to speak, within the experiences.
So we talked about kind of 2 or 3 examples of these things that you can add into journeys to make them richer. And we've talked about having a human in the loop, someone you can talk to at the right kind of moment, having more information on certain things that you might not understand. Are there any other examples you can give us? Oh, we talked about exit ramps as well. That was the third one. Yeah, I said 3 and I gave you 2. Yeah.
No, I think that we're going to see, aren't we, that almost every kind of regulated journey becomes far more digital over time, and that technology is moving incredibly quickly. I don't think that's necessarily the question. The real question is whether we can kind of automate confidence as well as kind of capability into those things. So AI is becoming exceptionally good at analyzing information, identifying all those patterns, making recommendations. But people still need to understand what's happening and why it's happening, and what they can do if something doesn't feel right. So it's very important to kind of, build that up. And I think, the winners there will be not the ones that sort of automate journeys. It'll be the ones that kind of routinely, design into those journeys the reassurance around them, those moments that matter the most. So, it's like taking a mortgage application. Of course, AI can really easily kind of, assess affordability, but the moment that matters isn't the calculation, it's the decision someone has to, it's a decision that someone's been kind of waiting weeks to hear. And if the answer is simply no, you haven't got your application, that just dumps on somebody. But if you can go on to explain why, what influenced the decision, what they can do next, and make it easy to speak to someone, then that's, a much more beneficial outcome. And instead of the person sulking off and going elsewhere to another provider, they're more likely to come back to you. So I think in the future, the organizations that succeed won't be the ones that with the smartest AI. They'll be the ones that make people feel most safe when they're using it.
It strikes me as you're saying that even that is something that Okay, as we learn more about that, as we get more data about how our customers behave, organizations can much quicker deploy with AI. They can deploy sort of rapid iterations of journeys, tag things onto the end, remove them, test them. In doing that, you've got quite a lot of disruption throughout lots of digital journeys. If you're talking about a big insurance provider, for example, how important will it be as all these, say, insurance providers have the same ability to look at their data, roll stuff out, optimize for the customer experience, that they keep their own journeys within their kind of brand estate consistent to kind of, I suppose it gives that foundation of humanness to the automated process where you're not dealing with a human. That must be quite important as well, right?
No, I think it is. And I think, as AI platforms, develop, there's going to be a kind of a convergence of things. And the real challenge there is how to develop distinctiveness at scale. And I think this is where trust becomes a genuinely competitive advantage. So, we know that most organizations can buy the same technology and they can access the same models. And over time, everything is just can become much more efficient, but going to become much more vanilla. But what I think is really hard to copy in that world is actually how the organization makes you feel. And we've started to think much more about this idea of trust as a mosaic. So there isn't just one thing that creates trust. It's built from thousands of confident signals that are embedded across the experience. So, you take a healthcare symptom checker, for example. Most AIs can tell you to go to A&E, right? But the more trusted organizations will actually explain why making that recommendation, what came from that, what symptoms triggered it, what to expect, when you arrive at A&E and what to do if your condition changes before you get there. Now, the advice is the same, go to A&E, but the confidence that it creates is completely different. And I think, competitors can copy features, of course they can, but what they can't easily copy is this myriad of tiny kind of confidence signals that have been built up through the rest of the journey and are, embedded across the organization. And so I think organizations need to think really hard about what is it about them that are generating those positive emotions of confidence and trust in customers. And some of those things will be very, very common because they're kind of sector specific. Some will be universal, like confidence and integrity and the like. But some of them will be very, very specific, things that they can develop as qualities and be known for. And I
They
think
can then
that's
kind
why
of sprinkle on across all their journeys and interactions with customers. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think the next generation of experience design isn't about designing those specific interactions, but it's about working out how to deliberately put those sprinkles into the experience, deliberately design that confidence.
And that brings us back to, well, that's something even more abstract or difficult to hold on to grasp as an organization. How am I doing in terms of the trust we've built across journeys
measurement
this year? Because we're talking about different audience segments, different, probably maybe even different businesses within our businesses, not just departments. So how do you start to assess that?
So I think that's actually one of the biggest shifts that organizations need to make. And I think, here's an example of how AI has really helped us to do that. So most organizations tend to measure what people did. So they have these sort of lagging indicators. They look at NPS and CSAT and whatever, and they're all very big and noble and powerful, but they're kind of like, they tell you at the end of the day what's going on. What's more interesting is trying to understand how and why people behaved in the way they do. So I think that, the better question is to ask, where did confidence begin to be gained and where did it drain within the experience? And that was difficult until recently to measure objectively. But AI has given us things like emotional analytics, which allow us to really quantify emotional responses across thousands of interactions and identify the moments within that are creating confidence or uncertainty. And you can link those behaviors, directly to abandonment, to complaints, advocacy. And for us, this has become a kind of a core part of now how we design experiences, because you're no longer relying on kind of instinct or anecdotal feedback. You can actually pinpoint where trust is being built or where it's being lost, and you can then prioritize the changes that will have the greatest commercial impact. So whereas previously trust has felt fairly intangible, it's now something that actually you can measure, you can design for, and you can improve with the same rigor as you would with any other business metric.
Can you break that down a little more sort of technically for me? Like when you talk about emotional analytics, are we saying we're looking at sort of sentiment analysis across different channels and then linking them into all of our existing, the noble
Yes.
metrics, as you said?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that how it works?
I think so I think the best way of understanding it, sort of, in its most basic form, we're very familiar with sentiment analysis, but a sentiment analysis is fairly crude. It's kind of going, are they saying something that's positive or negative, or are they indifferent about the experience? There is some incredible technology now that enables you to ingest vast amounts of data and look at what people are saying. So this might come from all your Qualtrics data, your Trustpilot data, reviews, feedback, surveys, et cetera, et cetera. And you can look at that line by line, and you can look at what people are saying. And you can now discern within that from there's a very famous wheel of emotion called Pulchik's wheel of emotion, which has identified 24 human emotions. And what we can now do in every utterance that someone makes, you can identify what's the emotion behind that thing that they're saying, and how intense is that emotion. Is it, felt very strongly, moderately? Is it, felt just a little bit? And so you can take all your data that looks at the entire journey that you're having, and you can then see almost in Technicolor what the emotions are and how they're playing out across those journeys. And we can now connect that through statistical analysis of various models to begin to understand what that relates to in terms of their future spend, their propensity to churn. Once you understand how much is each customer worth to you, you can begin to see how the positive emotions they're feeling will have them returning and therefore spending more, or the negative emotions that they're experiencing will have them stepping back and spending less. So you've got this really kind of strong. So it's basically textual analysis. So you're looking at what people are saying. You're identifying whether they are whether they trust you, whether they feel joy within this experience, whether they are apprehensive, whatever emotion you care to mention. We can identify that now, and we can tell you, what it's costing your business.
And that kind of makes those 2D metrics like churn and average
Yeah.
order value very 3D all of a sudden, because it puts
Absolutely
humanity behind them.
And what you're able to do now is see these things almost in real time. So again, it's like, the NPS, the CSAT, et cetera, they tend to come out on a quarterly basis, et cetera. So you kind of,
They're
you see it.
quite historic. Yeah.
Yeah. But by that point, there might have been, 100 reasons why someone, is going to give that score or not return. What you're able to do now is see this thing, almost in real time playing out. In a matter of days, you can get that data back, and you can see what's changed and what to do about it, and you can prioritize all those things.
Are there any metrics that you would say not to look at, not to rely on, that teams perhaps over rely on when they're assessing journeys?
I think that it's quite easy to confuse kind of efficient behavior with confident behavior. Completion rate is a great example of this. Just because someone completes a journey doesn't actually mean they felt good about it or they trusted it. Sometimes they completed it because they had no alternative to complete it. But back in the organization, someone's gone, tick, great journey. Yeah, that happened.
Yeah.
We repossessed their car or something.
Yeah,
exactly. But, we didn't get an understanding of whether there's kind of hesitation in that experience. Did people kind of leave and come back? Did they seek help? Did they switch channels? We weren't able to see, that digital footprint of confidence rising or falling. And that's why I think that the best trust metrics really kind of combine this operational data with this behavioral and this emotional insight. Otherwise, it's very easy to just optimize a journey that looks, successful on a dashboard, but actually leaves people feeling, a bit uncertain at the same time.
Yeah. So let's bring this back to the kind of practical. What can you do now as a within our audience, we will have people who maybe have quite legacy,
Yeah.
manual, bumpy processes and want to make them digital.
Yeah.
We will have people, and that goes for, SMBs all the way up to enterprise, saying we will have people who have digital processes, but every one of their journeys is different. Some of them have parts that are manual, especially when you're the large providers and platforms, as they acquire different books of, different pension schemes, etc., and are trying to make them more consistent, trying to build that trust and that confidence in. There's a lot that we've discussed today. What should they do within the next 3 months, the
Yeah.
next couple of months, to start on this journey?
So I think I'd start by changing one question. And I think that, instead of asking, how do we make this journey faster? What they should be asking is where does, this idea of confidence kind of rise and fall? I would look at their journeys and try to identify where the biggest drains are. So the moments where people, are stopping feeling informed, they stop feeling in control or reassured. Most organizations already know where complaints happen. They just haven't looked at them through the lens of confidence. So what can you learn from that? I then set about redesigning one journey by very deliberately adding in kind of confidence signals in there. So not necessarily more functionality, but better explanations, clearer ownership, more transparency, work out where to have a well-timed, perhaps human conversation. And I think the exciting thing is that these changes are often inexpensive, but they're commercially incredibly powerful. And I really think the organizations that are going to succeed over the next decade won't simply automate the fastest, but they'll be the ones that become the most trusted.
In you saying that, I'm thinking of many meetings that I may have been in with clients where they've said, we don't need that, we don't need that, we don't need that in a journey. How do you personally sort of had that conversation with clients when you might be in a room with sort of lots of senior leaders in an organization you're showing a journey to, and they're saying, that's not necessary, is it? Get rid of that. Get rid of that. We want to make it as easy as possible. You must encounter this a lot. What's your general response? Yeah.
Well, fortunately, what we can do now is show them why they shouldn't do that, because we can show them how much it costs if you get rid of that thing that you think is going to, make it easier or save you money. We can show you, the downstream kind of revenue impact of that. And certainly there are things that, we look through a journey. There's always inefficiencies in it and things you can get rid of. But it's taking that moment to actually stop and to think about, what they should do. There's one, that remain nameless, one company that we were working for, and they were getting basically kind of overloaded with inquiries to do a particular type of work, and the system becoming sluggish, etc. And their solution to fixing that was, what we'll do is we'll charge people to make an inquiry about it. And you're kind of going, how incredibly insane is that to do that? You've got a bunch of people who are sending you all these signals that they're interested in you. And because it's awkward for you to deal with all those inquiries, you're going to charge them to make an inquiry. And what's the message that's going to send back to those people? They're not coming back to speak to you again. So I think you've got to put the right hat on when you're looking at these things, particularly when you're thinking about efficiencies. And you've got to take a moment to think about what the unintended consequences of things might be. In the past, I heard a lot about contact centers, about, call routing and optimizing call durations and the like. And those things are just being stripped down. And there's never any opportunity in there for, colleagues to kind of ask questions, be a bit more proactive, kind of connect with customers. And where is it that the human needs to be involved to really kind of create that connection, that emotion, that relationship?
Listen, Ollie, we need to let you go, but it's been really interesting to chat. The time's just flown by.
No worries.
Where can people find you? What services can you offer? How can you help our largely financial services audience, but also legal and the like, our regulated digital audience?
Absolutely. Engine is, as you mentioned, is an experience design consultancy. So we help organizations design experiences that are not only easier to use, but are generally easier to trust. And our work has spanned, financial services, transport, healthcare, retail, because confidence is just as important as convenience. So, we've spent years, being fascinated by this question about, as organizations become more digital, more automated, more AI enabled, why do, at the same time, do they become more efficient? Do they seemingly become less trustworthy? And that's led us into a lot of work understanding what we call this trust gap, the gap between an experience that works operationally and what feels kind of trustworthy emotionally. And we have some, weird and wonderful ways of really kind of getting into that journey, that experience, understanding very, very quickly through things like trust audits, what's gaining and draining trust within that experience, being very, very specific about that, exactly where it is, helping to put a dollar value behind that, and helping to kind of prioritize what you need to do to change that, whether that is, as I say, healthcare provider, financial services, hospitality. The same challenges exist and can be dealt with in a very similar way.
Amazing. And people can contact you on your website?
The website, yes, enginecxd.com. And I'm sure in the description here, there'll be some more links and details, but we'd love to hear from anybody. We'd love to continue this conversation. If anybody's got any thoughts or views on it, it's a subject that fascinates me. So it would be great to talk about more.
For now, thank you so much for your time, Ollie. We'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me on. All the best.